So you mainly invest into bonds.
Yeah.
But where else do you allocate your investments?
We mostly invest in bonds, and in some way it's a pity. It's a pity because, as I said before, the scheme is very young. So we are at the beginning of a long ramping up period. So it means that the money we are getting from our contributions, out of this money we don't pay much in terms of benefits. So the net positive cash flow is really huge. When I say huge, I mean it. Because it will be above 1.5 billion euro a year for the next 20 years. So it's now that we can afford to invest, in illiquid assets, meaning assets that people who are developing, like people who are investing in infrastructure, airports, whatever, are ready to pay a liquidity premium to get the money from pension funds or long-term investor, just to be sure that they won't have to repay that money before 10 years or 15 years, the time necessary to get a return on their investment. So you have people on the one hand who need long-term financing, and you have people who are able to bring that financing, and we are among those people. And unfortunately, the regulation up to now has been quite conservative, if I may say so. So I can understand, because when ERAF was set up, it was almost the first time there was a pension fund in France. So I guess that the regulatory authorities wanted to set up a very prudent framework. So that's the reason why we were obliged to invest a minimum of 75% in bonds. We got a change 3 years ago, and this minimum level of investing in bonds was reduced to 65%, which is quite high. And especially if you consider that those bonds were mostly fixed interest bonds. And people have to realize that we are reaching the end of a very long period of decreasing interest bonds. If you take the example of France, at the beginning of the 80s, the state was issuing bonds at 16% for 10 years. And lately, the French Treasury issued at 2 plus something. Mm. So, once again, where is the upside when you buy fixed interest bonds? Yeah, that's something you should consider. Mm. So obviously, diversification is very important for ERAF, and we can afford it. So the good news is that we have already invested in stocks. Unfortunately, the timing was not optimal since we started in 2007. Oh. And the CAC was 6,000 at the time. So as you may know, maybe it's 3,000 now. Mm-hmm. But once again, what is important is to invest every year. Because you will have entry point that will smooth out this level of investing. So stocks maybe could be a bigger part of our investment. We are authorized to go up to 25%, and I guess in the next years this is something we will try to reach. Real estate is obviously an interesting investment for pension funds, because you get a yield, by renting the buildings or the malls or whatever you have invested in, and there is some sort of capital appreciation. So it's almost a synthetic bond, yes. Index on inflation. After, obviously, we should start investing in emerging economies. Emerging, they are not so emerging now, but emerged. And should it be directly? I'm not so sure, because when you are investing outside your country, you don't know really much about the regulations, the governance. So maybe as a first step, we could invest in big corporate names, global brands that are benefiting from the growth of China, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brazil.
To start with.
Start with.
In terms of diversification, I guess because this is such a huge sum that you manage, maybe even a very tiny percentage could be invested into very small companies that are emerging, or environmental technology companies, or project companies. I think that would make a big difference.
Yeah, private equity, it's very important. The one you are referring to, startup, because they are preparing the growth of tomorrow, those companies. The difficulty we may have is that private equity in France is something that is bearing some pejorative sense, meaning, whatever, because many trustees think that private equity is mostly LBO, big leverage buyout. So you have to explain, no, this is not what we are talking about. What we are talking about is investing in non-listed companies, those small startups that maybe will fail for some of them, but if you just have one that will succeed on the change of the way we are delivering electricity, storing energy, it's and this is something I think my trustees will consider. I do my best to convince them that it makes sense for us, not for a big part of our investment, but maybe 5% invested in non-listed company makes sense.
Yes.
Most of my peers, because sometimes we meet with other pension funds, are already invested in that kind of non-listed assets.
Yes.
Alberta pension fund, others in Canada, with whom I met sometimes, they are already invested in that kind of assets.
SRI funds tend to include more currency and bond investments in France rather than equities. Are these really SRI investments? How do they lead to any change at all?
I mean, SRI should not be limited to stocks, or you can. First of all, SRI policy for RF is transverse. It's global. It should apply to all kind of assets. Obviously, being adapted to the very peculiarities of those assets. But that's the reason why, for example, for bonds, we have been recruiting external providers to make an analysis of once again sustainability or SRI policy of states, local authorities. It's a different analysis compared to the one we have for companies, but you can do it and it's a good analysis of risk for even countries. If you had paid more attention to the SRI analysis of a country like Greece, it would have provided you a better estimate of a risk than the usual ratings provided by Standard & Poor's, Moody's, whatever. Because what were the points stressed by those SRI analysis? Those were your capacity to get taxes paid, corruption, the time needed for you to get paid by states or hospital or local authorities. So you had many warnings, telling you that maybe something awful was brewing. So I think you can have a very global approach to investing, but you have to take into account obviously the peculiarities of the asset classes. And also, when you are investing abroad, you cannot have the same level of stringency for developed markets on countries that are developing. So that's I say the approach we are trying to implement.
What is the vision of the future of SRI, and do you think that having a left-wing president, François Hollande, will have a positive influence on this?
I mean, unfortunately, in some way, SRI will be successful if long-term investors really get involved. Because look at the last Rio summit, you see that it's not enough to have states embark, because the people who own the money, are long-term investors. They should get more involved. And ERA decided, for example, this year, to start to develop a policy of engagement, because it's good to have principles, but after you have to talk to companies. It's not. We don't want to have a confrontational approach to that. We don't want to fight with companies. It would not make sense. We just want to establish a dialogue, but it needs two to tango. Companies also have to understand that it's normal for people who have a fiduciary duty. I'm CEO of ERA, but I mean I have to explain to 4.6 million people what I'm doing, to make sure that they will get their retirement benefit. So I'm responsible for that, and I have to try to make those people who are managing the companies understand that it's normal for us to ask them, what do you do to make your business sustainable? What do you do to prepare your company to address the coming internalization of externalities? Is it something you are considering or not? I mean, so once again, I think it's a question of long-term investor, being Japanese, American, European, to start talking to each other and saying, there are things we won't accept anymore. For example, we won't accept to be shuffled aside by big CEOs saying, what are you talking about, SRI? What does it mean? I'm just here to make maximum profit. I say, no, you are here to deliver a sustainable return on the long term. To be frank, we also have to be realistic. Yes. Sometimes long-term investors are schizophrenic. They say one thing and they do another one. So, but once again, I think there has been a change. Many long-term investors now realize that maximization of the immediate profit is not the best way to achieve your long-term results. But it starts also with your board, with your trustees. They have to be consistent with that. Meaning they have to be really committed to that approach.
Mr. Philippe Defossé, thank you very much for joining us today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.